And that, class, is why the Battle of Cannae is considered one of the greatest tactical masterpieces in military history, I concluded, gesturing dramatically towards the faded map of ancient Rome on the chalkboard. Hannibal's double envelopment maneuver completely annihilated the Roman legions, proving that superior numbers don't always guarantee victory. A few scattered coughs and the shuffling of notebooks were the only responses I got. History wasn't exactly a crowd pleaser at Alexandria University, especially not at 8 a.m. on a Friday. Still, I couldn't help but feel a thrill as I recounted the strategic brilliance of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who had outsmarted and outmaneuvered one of the most powerful armies in the ancient world. "Professor Davies?" a bored voice drawled from the back of the classroom. "Can we get back to the textbook now? This Hannibal stuff is not on the syllabus." I sighed. "Miss Johnson, the syllabus is merely a guideline. Understanding history requires exploring the key events, the pivotal battles, the—" Yeah, whatever," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Just tell us what we need to know for the exam." The bell rang, signaling the end of class and my escape from the intellectual wasteland that was introduction to Western civilization. I gathered my notes, a familiar pang of disappointment settling in my gut. This wasn't exactly the life I'd envisioned for myself. A history professor lecturing to a room full of indifferent students, my passion for the past met with apathy and boredom. "Nathan, darling, are you still droning on about those dead people?" Melissa's voice, sharp and impatient, greeted me as I stepped out of the classroom. "They're not just dead people, Melissa," I corrected, a familiar weariness creeping into my voice. "They're historical figures, pivotal players in the grand tapestry of human civilization." "Whatever," she scoffed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her designer handbag. "Are you almost done? I have a reservation at that new fusion restaurant downtown, and you know how long the waiting list is." "Yes, Melissa," I sighed. "I know." Melissa, my fiancée, was a woman of ambition, of power, of relentless pursuit of social status. She saw my passion for history as a quaint hobby, a harmless distraction from the real world of finance and influence, the world she inhabited with such effortless grace. "You really need to get a more practical job, Nathan," she'd often say, her voice laced with a condescending pity that grated on my nerves. "Something with, you know, actual power, influence, money." I'd try to explain, to share my enthusiasm for the lessons of the past, the wisdom of ancient strategists, the intricate workings of civilizations long gone. But she wouldn't listen. She couldn't. Her world was one of quarterly earnings and social connections, a world where knowledge of the Peloponnesian War held no value. And as I followed Melissa towards the parking lot, her heels clicking impatiently on the pavement, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of displacement. Like I was a character in the wrong story, a scholar trapped in a world that valued ambition over intellect, power over knowledge. "Honestly, Nathan, sometimes I wonder why I even bother," Melissa sighed dramatically, pushing a perfectly sculpted eyebrow towards her perfectly sculpted hairline. We were at yet another one of her endless networking events, a cocktail party filled with people whose names I could never remember, and whose conversations revolved around things like synergy and paradigm shifts. I, meanwhile, was trapped in a corner, nursing a lukewarm glass of something that vaguely resembled white wine, and trying to avoid eye contact with anyone who might try to engage me in a conversation about leveraging core competencies. "Bother with what, darling?" I asked, trying to feign interest. "With you, of course," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of exasperation and condescension. "With this relationship." My stomach lurched. This wasn't the first time she'd voiced her dissatisfaction with our situation, but there was a sharpness in her tone tonight, an edge of finality that sent a shiver down my spine. "What's wrong, Melissa?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's wrong?" she echoed, her voice rising in frustration. "Oh, I don't know, Nathan. Maybe the fact that you're a history professor. In this day and age, it's practically medieval." "But I enjoy teaching," I protested, though the words lacked conviction even to my own ears. "Enjoyment doesn't pay the bills, Nathan," she scoffed. It doesn't get you a penthouse apartment or a summer house in the Hamptons. It doesn't get you power. Power? Yes, power, she exclaimed, her eyes flashing with ambition. The kind of power that gets you noticed, that gets you invited to the right parties, that gets you ahead. And I don't have that? The question came out as a pathetic whimper. She laughed, a humorless, brittle sound. Oh, Nathan, darling, you live in a world of dusty books and dead empires. You have no real power, no influence, no relevance. Her words stung, a cruel assessment of my perceived inadequacies. Melissa, with her ruthless ambition, her social connections, her unwavering pursuit of wealth and status, she was right. In her world, I was an outsider, a relic of a bygone era, a man with no real power. I need someone who can elevate me, Nathan, she continued, her voice softening with a condescending pity that was worse than her anger. Someone who can open doors, who can introduce me to the right people, who can enhance my brand. And I can't? The question was barely a whisper. She shook her head, her perfectly coiffed hair swaying with the motion. You're a sweet man, Nathan. Intelligent, kind, but you're stuck. Stuck in the past, stuck in a world that doesn't matter anymore. She took a step back, her eyes cold, her voice firm. I need more, Nathan. I need someone who can keep up with me. And with that, she turned and walked away, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor, her figure disappearing into the crowd of ambitious social climbers, leaving me standing there, alone, a forgotten footnote in the grand narrative of her life. The storm hit Alexandria with the fury of a scorned goddess. Rain lashed down in sheets, the wind howling like a banshee, the thunder booming like the wrath of the heavens. I huddled in my cramped apartment, the power flickering ominously, my mind a maelstrom of emotions after Melissa's brutal dismissal. Stuck in the past, am I? I muttered, pouring myself another generous glass of scotch. Irrelevant? We'll see about that. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and the lights finally gave up the ghost, plunging the apartment into darkness. Great, I grumbled, fumbling for a candle. Just what I needed. As I lit the candle, a strange hum filled the air, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. I looked around, my senses heightened, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the air crackled with energy, a blinding light filling the room, and a swirling vortex of colors erupted in the center of my living room. I shielded my eyes, my mind reeling, my scotch-fueled bravado evaporating in the face of the inexplicable. What the? I stammered, backing away from the swirling portal, my academic curiosity battling with a primal instinct to flee. The vortex pulsed, beckoning, its colors swirling like a hypnotic kaleidoscope. I felt a strange pull, a force drawing me towards the unknown, and a voice, ancient and powerful, whispered in my mind, "Come, your destiny awaits." My destiny? I muttered, my voice trembling. But I have a lecture on Monday. The pull intensified, and I stumbled towards the portal, my resistance crumbling in the face of the overwhelming force. This was insane. This was impossible. This was happening. With a final surge of energy, the vortex engulfed me, my scream swallowed by the swirling chaos, my world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes, my head spinning, my body aching. The storm was gone. The apartment was gone. Everything familiar was gone. I was lying on a field of trampled grass, the air thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Around me, men in strange armor clashed in a brutal melee, their swords flashing, their screams echoing through the air. This wasn't Alexandria. This wasn't my world. What the? I stammered, scrambling to my feet, my mind reeling, my senses overwhelmed. Where am I? A soldier, his face contorted with rage, charged towards me, his sword raised high. I instinctively ducked, narrowly avoiding decapitation. This wasn't a history lesson anymore. This was real. This was terrifying. "This is definitely not on the syllabus," I muttered, my voice trembling as I stumbled back, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos, the carnage, the utter impossibility of it all. But even as fear threatened to consume me, a spark of something else ignited within me. A spark of curiosity, of excitement, of possibility. This was a new world, a world of ancient battles, of forgotten empires, of untold stories. And I, Nathan Davies, the history professor, the dismissed scholar, the man with no real power, I was suddenly at the center of it all. The storm hit Alexandria with the fury of a scorned goddess. Rain lashed down in sheets, the wind howling like a banshee, the thunder booming like the wrath of the heavens. I huddled in my cramped apartment, the power flickering ominously, my mind a maelstrom of emotions after Melissa's brutal dismissal. "Stuck in the past, am I?" I muttered, pouring myself another generous glass of scotch. "Irrelevant? We'll see about that." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and the lights finally gave up the ghost, plunging the apartment into darkness. "Great," I grumbled, fumbling for a candle. "Just what I needed." As I lit the candle, a strange hum filled the air, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. I looked around, my senses heightened, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, the air crackled with energy, a blinding light filling the room, and a swirling vortex of colors erupted in the center of my living room. I shielded my eyes, my mind reeling, my scotch-fueled bravado evaporating in the face of the inexplicable. "What the—" I stammered, backing away from the swirling portal, my academic curiosity battling with a primal instinct to flee. The vortex pulsed, beckoning, its colors swirling like a hypnotic kaleidoscope. I felt a strange pull, a force drawing me towards the unknown, and a voice, ancient and powerful, whispered in my mind, "Come, your destiny awaits." "My destiny?" I muttered, my voice trembling. "But I have a lecture on Monday." The pull intensified, and I stumbled towards the portal, my resistance crumbling in the face of the overwhelming force. This was insane. This was impossible. This was happening. With a final surge of energy, the vortex engulfed me. My screams swallowed by the swirling chaos, my world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. And then, nothing. I opened my eyes, my head spinning, my body aching. The storm was gone. The apartment was gone. Everything familiar was gone. I was lying on a field of trampled grass, the air thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Around me, men in strange armor clashed in a brutal melee, their swords flashing, their screams echoing through the air. This wasn't Alexandria. This wasn't my world. "What the—" I stammered, scrambling to my feet, my mind reeling, my senses overwhelmed. "Where am I?" A soldier, his face contorted with rage, charged towards me, his sword raised high. I instinctively ducked, narrowly avoiding decapitation. This wasn't a history lesson anymore. This was real. This was terrifying. "This is definitely not on the syllabus," I muttered, my voice trembling as I stumbled back, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos, the carnage, the utter impossibility of it all. But even as fear threatened to consume me, a spark of something else ignited within me. A spark of curiosity, of excitement, of possibility. This was a new world, a world of ancient battles, of forgotten empires, of untold stories. And I, Nathan Davies, the history professor, the dismissed scholar, the man with no real power, I was suddenly at the center of it all. Okay, so maybe terrifying was an understatement. Holy crap, I've been sucked into a historical reenactment gone wrong, and everyone here is actually trying to kill me. Was probably more accurate. I scrambled back from the melee, narrowly avoiding a stray arrow. Seriously, these guys had terrible aim, and a charging warhorse. Whoa, those things are bigger up close. The battlefield was a scene of utter chaos. Men in leather and bronze armor hacked at each other with swords and axes, the ground littered with bodies, the air thick with the stench of blood and sweat. "Excuse me," I yelled, trying to make myself heard above the din. "Pardon me, just trying to get through. Anyone know where the nearest Starbucks is?" Yeah, not my best work. Apparently, "excuse me" wasn't in the ancient battle cry vocabulary. A particularly burly warrior, his face smeared with blood and what I hoped was mud, turned towards me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice thick with an accent I couldn't place. "And what are you doing here?" I'm Nathan," I stammered, trying to sound confident. "Just passing through. Big fan of historical reenactments." He grunted, clearly unimpressed. "You fight with which army?" "Army?" I blinked. "Oh, I'm, uh, a freelance observer, independent contractor, here for the cultural experience?" He raised an eyebrow, his grip tightening on his axe. "You speak strangely, and you wear strange garments." I glanced down at my tweed jacket and corduroy pants. Yeah, not exactly standard battlefield attire. "It's vintage?" I offered weakly. "Retro chic?" He clearly wasn't buying it. "You are a spy," he roared, raising his axe. "Die, enemy!" "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" I yelled, backing away. "Hold on a second. I'm not a spy. I'm a... My mind raced, desperately searching for a plausible explanation. "I'm a historian," I blurted out. "I study battles. I know all about, uh, flanking maneuvers and siege warfare and logistics." The warrior paused, his axe hovering in midair. "Logistics," he repeated, his brow furrowed. "What is this, logistics?" "Logistics," I exclaimed, seizing the opportunity. "It's the art of supplying an army. Making sure you have enough food, weapons, and other important stuff." He lowered his axe slightly, his expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "You know of such things?" "Know about them?" I scoffed, channeling my inner Hannibal Barca. "I practically invented them. Well, not really, but I know a lot about them. More than anyone else here, probably." He stared at me, his eyes narrowed in assessment. This was my chance. My one chance to survive this insane situation. I had to convince him, to prove my worth, to avoid getting my head chopped off. "All right," he grunted finally. "Prove it. Show me this logistics." And with that, my unexpected career change from unappreciated history professor to battlefield consultant began. Turns out, logistics was a bit of a revelation to these guys. Who knew that things like efficient supply lines and organized troop movements could be such a game changer? "You're saying," the burly warrior who introduced himself as Ragnar said, scratching his beard in bewilderment, "that we should number our supply wagons? And keep lists of how many swords we have?" "Exactly," I exclaimed, feeling a surge of professorial enthusiasm. Think of it like a really intense inventory spreadsheet, but with more blood and less Excel. Ragnar, bless his simple heart, looked at me like I'd just sprouted a second head. Spreadsheet. "Never mind," I sighed. "The point is, if you know where your supplies are and how to get them to your troops efficiently, you can fight longer, stronger, and, well, you're less likely to run out of arrows in the middle of a battle." He blinked. "That makes sense." And so began my crash course in logistics 101 inches for the bewildered warriors of this kingdom, empire. I still wasn't quite sure where I was, but the language seemed vaguely Germanic, the armor vaguely medieval, and the hygiene. Well, let's just say they hadn't quite discovered the joys of indoor plumbing yet. But the more I observed their battles, their strategies, their complete lack of any organizational skills, the more I realized something incredible. My knowledge, the knowledge I had accumulated over years of studying history, of analyzing battles, of dissecting the tactics of ancient generals, It was actually useful here. Like, really useful. Why do you attack in a straight line? I asked Ragnar during one particularly chaotic skirmish, where their warriors were getting decimated by a hail of enemy arrows. It is how it is done. He shrugged, as if the concept of any other formation was utterly alien. But what if, I suggested, sketching a crude diagram in the dirt with a stick, you split your forces, attack from the flanks, use the terrain to your advantage? He stared at the diagram, his brow furrowed in concentration. This flanking, it could work. And it did. The next battle, using a modified version of the Roman pincer movement, with a few adjustments to account for the lack of disciplined legions, they completely routed the enemy, their victory swift and decisive. Ragnar, his face beaming with a mixture of blood and delight, clapped me on the shoulder, nearly dislocating my arm in the process. You are a genius, Nathan. A true, what was the word? Strategist? I offered. Strategist, he roared, raising his axe in triumph. You are a strategist. And as I watched the victorious warriors celebrate their unlikely victory, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over me. This wasn't a lecture hall. This wasn't a dusty textbook. This was real. This was history in the making. And I, Nathan Davies, the unappreciated history professor, the dismissed scholar, the man with no real power, I was suddenly a player on this grand, chaotic stage. Melissa, with her ambition and her social connections, would never understand this. She would never comprehend the thrill of applying knowledge to action, of shaping events, of being more than just a footnote in someone else's story. And as the sun set over the blood-soaked battlefield, casting long shadows on the celebrating warriors, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had a lot to learn about this new world, about its customs, its politics, its lack of sanitation. But one thing was clear. I was no longer just a historian. I was a strategist, and I was ready to make my mark on history. Ragnar, bless his war-loving heart, was eager to put my strategist skills to the test. Apparently, they were in a bit of a predicament. Their army, the Vargarians, I think that's what he called them, was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and generally out of luck against the neighboring kingdom of the Aethelredans. Creative names weren't their strong suit. They have us trapped, Ragnar explained, gesturing towards a crudely drawn map in the dirt. Their army is larger, their weapons are better, and their leader, King Aethelred, is a cunning warrior. I peered at the map, my mind already analyzing the terrain, the troop placements, the potential weaknesses in the enemy's strategy. Interesting. Very linear. Ragnar frowned. Linear? What means this linear? It means they're predictable, I said, tapping the map with a stick. They attack in waves, they rely on brute force, they don't adapt. Classic amateur mistake. Ragnar looked at me with a mixture of awe and confusion. But their army is larger. They have more warriors, more horses, more... He paused, searching for the word. Pointy things. Pointy things are great, I conceded. But they're not everything. You need strategy, Ragnar. You need to outsmart your enemy, not just outnumber them. And so, I launched into a lecture that would have made Hannibal proud. We talked flanking maneuvers, feigned retreats, and the importance of exploiting the terrain. I explained the concept of a reserve force, the psychological impact of surprise attacks, and the strategic value of, not charging headfirst into the enemy lines. Ragnar, bless his simple warrior soul, absorbed it all like a sponge. He asked questions. He debated tactics. He even attempted to draw his own diagrams in the dirt, with limited success, I might add. It was like teaching a particularly enthusiastic but slightly confused golden retriever the art of chess. So, he said finally, his eyes gleaming with the newfound tactical awareness, we will pretend to retreat? And then attack from the sides, like a wolf pack? Exactly, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of professorial pride. except with less howling and more, well, you know, killing. The battle was something else. Imagine a medieval mosh pit, but with more swords and less body odor. Marginally. I watched from a safe distance, because, let's be real, I was a historian, not a warrior. My heart pounding as Ragnar's army executed the plan with surprising precision. They feigned a retreat, luring the Æthelreddans into a carefully prepared trap, then attacked from the flanks, their surprise assault throwing the enemy into disarray. The Æthelreddans, used to their predictable frontal assaults, were completely unprepared for this unorthodox approach. Their lines crumbled, their formations dissolved, and their morale, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly soaring. King Ethelred, a burly man with a magnificent beard and a rather impressive crown, looked like he was about to have a coronary. He bellowed orders, trying to rally his troops, but it was too late. The Vargarians, fueled by their newfound tactical advantage and the thrill of actually outsmarting their enemies, pressed their attack, their victory assured. By nightfall, the battlefield was theirs. The Æthelreddans were routed, their king captured, their armies scattered. The Vargarians, meanwhile, were celebrating their unlikely triumph, their cheers echoing through the twilight, their respect for their new strategist bordering on hero worship. Ragnar, his face beaming with a mixture of blood and admiration, approached me. His axe thankfully lowered this time. "Nathan!" he boomed, clapping me on the back, again nearly dislocating my shoulder. "You are a marvel, a tactical wizard." "It was just a basic application of military principles," I said, trying to downplay my contribution. "Hannibal would have done the same." "Hannibal?" Ragnar frowned. "Who is this Hannibal?" "Never mind," I sighed. "The point is, we won, and you guys didn't even run out of arrows." He grinned. "This is true. We have many arrows left, enough to, shoot at the birds." "That's great, Ragnar," I said, trying to hide my amusement. As the celebrations continued, the captured King Ethelred was brought before me, his expression a mixture of bewilderment and grudging respect. "You," he said, his voice surprisingly calm for a defeated monarch. "You are the one they call, Nathan the Strategist?" Sure," I said, not quite sure how to respond to this unexpected title. He nodded slowly. "Your tactics, they were unconventional, unexpected, effective." "Thanks." He looked at me, his eyes narrowed in assessment. "You have a keen mind, Nathan the Strategist. A mind that could be valuable." And as I looked at the defeated king, the victorious warriors, the blood-soaked battlefield transformed into a scene of triumph, I knew that my life had taken a very unexpected and possibly very dangerous turn. But even as a flicker of fear ran through me, a surge of excitement, of possibility, of power coursed through my veins. This was my chance to make a difference, to shape events, to be more than just a history professor. This was my chance to become a legend. Word travels fast in a world without Twitter. One minute I'm explaining the concept of a flanking maneuver to a group of bewildered barbarians. The next, I'm Nathan the Strategist, the mastermind behind the Vargarians' improbable victory, a legend whispered in hushed tones across the land. Ragnar, ever the showman, decided to milk my newfound fame for all it was worth. He paraded me around the captured Æthelredan capital like a prize poodle, introducing me to every warrior, chieftain, and slightly less mud-caked peasant he could find. "This is Nathan," he'd bellow, his voice echoing through the cobblestone streets. "The strategist, the one who brought us victory." The locals, initially wary of the strange man in the tweed jacket who spoke in a weird accent and smelled suspiciously of lavender soap, a parting gift from a grateful Ethelredan merchant, quickly warmed up to me. They brought me gifts, cured meats, handcrafted axes, slightly less terrifying than the ones they used in battle, and a rather pungent cheese that I politely declined. My digestive system was still adjusting to the local cuisine. "You are a wise one, Nathan the Strategist," a grizzled old chieftain said to me, offering me a tankard of something that smelled vaguely of fermented berries and regret. Your knowledge of battle is unnatural. It's just history. I shrugged, trying to downplay my expertise. Knowing what worked in the past can be helpful in the present. The past? He frowned. What is this past? Never mind, I sighed, explaining the concept of historical timelines to someone who believed the world was flat and that thunder was caused by angry gods was proving to be more challenging than I'd anticipated. But the more battles I helped them win, the more my reputation grew. I introduced them to the wonders of siege towers, much to the dismay of the Ethelraden castle defenders. The strategic brilliance of scorched earth tactics, much to the dismay of the Ethelreden farmers, and the psychological impact of, well, letting a few prisoners escape to spread tales of the Vargarian's terrifying new strategist and his unnatural knowledge of warfare. They say you can see the future, Nathan, Ragnar said one evening as we sat around a campfire, roasting what I hoped was wild boar and not some endangered species of woodland creature. I can't see the future, Ragnar, I chuckled. I just know a bit about the past. But how can you know what the enemy will do? He asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Because people are predictable, I explained. They make the same mistakes, they fall into the same patterns, they underestimate their opponents. It's all happened before, Ragnar. Countless times. He shook his head in amazement. You are a wonder, Nathan. A true seer. Just a historian with a good memory, I said, taking a swig of the surprisingly palatable berry brew. Apparently, they weren't completely clueless when it came to fermentation. But the more I embraced my role as Nathan the strategist, the more I realized something unexpected. I was actually good at this. Like, really good. The thrill of applying my knowledge to real-world situations, of outmaneuvering my opponents, of shaping the course of events, it was intoxicating. And it wasn't just about the battles. I found myself advising Ragnar on everything from trade negotiations, introducing the concept of win-win scenarios to a group of people who believed in winner-takes-all was a challenge, I'll admit, to agricultural reforms. Crop rotation, people. It's not rocket science. My influence grew, my advice sought after, my presence welcomed in the halls of power, or in this case, the slightly drafty and rather pungent longhouses where the chieftains held their councils. You have changed us, Nathan the strategist, Ragnar said to me one day, his voice surprisingly sincere. You have made us stronger, smarter, more unified. I just gave you a few pointers, I shrugged, trying to downplay my contribution. Pointers? He scoffed. You have given us hope, the hope of a future where we are not just surviving, but thriving. And as I looked at the faces of the Vargarian warriors, their eyes filled with a newfound confidence, their spirits lifted by their recent victories, I realized that Ragnar was right. I had made a difference. I had used my knowledge, my passion, my unnatural understanding of history to shape the fate of a nation. Melissa, with her ambition and her social connections, would never understand this. She would never comprehend the satisfaction of applying knowledge to action, of empowering others, of being more than just a cog in the machine. And as the sun rose over the newly conquered Ethelreden lands, casting a golden light on the bustling Vargarian settlements, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had a vision, a plan, dare I say it, a destiny. This wasn't just about winning battles anymore. This was about building something lasting, something meaningful, something legendary. This was my chance to create an empire. All right, recruits, listen up. I stood on a makeshift platform, addressing a ragtag assembly of Vargarian warriors. Gone were the days of lecturing to bored college students. Now, my audience consisted of burly men with axes, scars, and a surprising enthusiasm for military strategy. Today's lesson, the phalanx formation, I announced, gesturing towards a group of warriors who were attempting to arrange themselves in something resembling a straight line. It's like a really angry wall of pointy things, designed to, We'll poke the enemy until they stop moving. The recruits, bless their war-loving hearts, were eager learners. They listened attentively as I explained the intricacies of shield walls, overlapping formations, and the importance of staying in sync. Apparently, the concept of marching in step was a bit of a novelty. But what if they attack from the sides? A particularly insightful warrior asked, his brow furrowed in concern. Excellent question, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of professorial pride. That's where the flanking maneuvers come in. Remember, a phalanx is strong from the front, but vulnerable on the sides, so we need to... And so I launched into a detailed explanation of flanking strategies, reserve forces, and the importance of adapting to the battlefield. These guys were quick studies, their practical experience complementing my theoretical knowledge. It was like a bizarre, bloodthirsty version of a study group, with more axes and less caffeine. Building an army from scratch, however, was proving to be more challenging than I'd anticipated. It wasn't just about teaching them fancy formations and battle tactics. It was about everything. Ragnar, I said one day after witnessing a particularly chaotic attempt at a supply run. We need to talk about your inventory management system. Ragnar, who was currently trying to decipher a scroll that looked suspiciously like a shopping list written by a drunken chicken, frowned. Inventory. Management. It means knowing what you have, where it is, and how to get it to the people who need it. I explained patiently. Think of it like organizing your sock drawer, but with more swords and less, well, socks. He blinked. Socks? Never mind, I sighed. The point is, we need a system, a way to track our supplies, our weapons, our everything. And so I introduced them to the wonders of lists. Yes, lists. Simple, organized lists of everything they had, where it was stored, and who was responsible for it. It was revolutionary, apparently. This list, it is magical, Ragnar exclaimed, staring at a neatly written inventory of their weaponry with wide eyes. I can see everything. We have many axes. Yes, Ragnar, I said, trying to hide my amusement. You have many axes. But it wasn't just about lists. We reorganized their supply lines, established a rudimentary system of communication between different units. Smoke signals, carrier pigeons. You work with what you have. And even implemented a basic training regimen that involved more than just hit things with axe until they stop moving. The results were impressive. The Vargarian army, once a disorganized horde of enthusiastic but somewhat clueless warriors, was transforming into a disciplined, efficient fighting force. They were still rough around the edges, sure, but they were learning, adapting, and most importantly, winning. Nathan the strategist, a young warrior, said to me one day, his eyes filled with admiration. You have made us better, stronger. I just gave you a few tools, I shrugged, trying to downplay my contribution. Tools? He scoffed. You have given us knowledge. The knowledge to fight smarter, not just harder. And as I looked at the faces of the Vargarian warriors, their eyes filled with a newfound confidence, their spirits lifted by their recent victories, I realized that he was right. I had made a difference. I had used my knowledge, my passion, my unnatural understanding of history to empower them, to give them a chance to not just survive, but to thrive. And as the sun set over the training grounds, casting long shadows on the practicing warriors, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had a vision, a plan, dare I say it, a destiny. This wasn't just about winning battles anymore. This was about building a legacy, about shaping the future, about becoming more than just a history professor. This was my chance to become a legend. Turns out, being a tactical wizard, Ragnar's words, not mine, had its perks. With a well-organized army and a seemingly endless supply of surprisingly effective strategies. Thanks, Hannibal. The Vargarians were unstoppable. We swept across the neighboring kingdoms like a caffeinated horde of chess-playing Vikings, leaving a trail of bewildered enemies and strategically acquired territory in our wake. Nathan, my friend, Ragnar said one evening, After a particularly satisfying victory against the hapless kingdom of the something or others. Honestly, their names all blurred together after a while. You have made us conquerors. Conquerors? I raised an eyebrow. Isn't that a bit intense? Intense? He grinned, his teeth gleaming in the firelight. Intense is good. Intense is what we do. We conquer. We plunder. He paused, searching for the word. Acquire. Things. Right, I said, trying to hide my amusement. Acquire things. Got it. But it wasn't just about mindless conquest. I insisted on incorporating elements of diplomacy, shall we say. Instead of just slaughtering everyone and burning their villages to the ground, which, to be fair, was the traditional Vargarian approach, I suggested, maybe offering them a choice. Join us, I'd say to the defeated rulers, through a hastily assembled interpreter. My attempts at learning the local language were progressing slowly. Become part of the Vargarian, empire and enjoy the benefits of organized supply lines and efficient tax collection? Surprisingly, it worked. Most of the neighboring kingdoms, tired of constant warfare and intrigued by the promise of, not having their villages burned to the ground, readily agreed to join the Vargarian thing. I was still working on a catchy name for our rapidly expanding political entity. You are a cunning one, Nathan, Ragnar said, after one particularly successful negotiation with the surprisingly reasonable queen of the, flower people. Seriously, their names were getting ridiculous. You have a way with words. It's called persuasion, Ragnar, I explained. The art of convincing people to do what you want without resorting to violence. He looked at me like I'd just revealed the secrets of the universe. This persuasion. It is powerful magic. Sure, Ragnar, I sighed. Powerful magic. But it wasn't just about diplomacy and logistics. I also introduced them to the wonders of psychological warfare. What are these strange things? Ragnar asked, staring at the effigies we had constructed. Crude figures of Vargarian warriors, made of straw and wood, their faces painted with terrifying expressions. They're scarecrows, Ragnar, I explained, but more intimidating. We're going to leave them outside the enemy camp, at night, to, boost their morale. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and awe. Boost their morale? Well, not exactly, I admitted. More like terrify them into submission. It's a classic tactic. Works every time. And it did. The enemy, confronted with the eerie sight of these silent, menacing figures looming in the darkness, their imaginations running wild, their morale plummeted. Their resistance crumbled, their defenses weakened, and their desire to fight anyone who employed such unnatural tactics evaporated faster than a spilled mead on a hot summer day. With each victory, my reputation grew. I was no longer just Nathan the strategist. I was Nathan the conqueror, the whisperer of fear, you get the idea. My name was spoken with a mixture of respect and trepidation, my advice sought after by kings and chieftains, my presence requested at every council, every negotiation, every battle planning session. You have become a legend, Nathan, Ragnar said to me one evening as we surveyed the vast expanse of newly conquered territory from atop a hill, mountain. Honestly, the geography here was a bit confusing. A legend? I chuckled. I'm just a history professor with a knack for applied knowledge. Knowledge is power, my friend, he said, his voice surprisingly profound for a guy who still believed the earth was flat. And you wield it like a weapon. And as I looked out at the vast expanse of land, the Vargarian banners flying proudly in the wind, the people cheering my name, I realized that he was right. I had become a force to be reckoned with. A leader, a conqueror. And as the sun set over my empire, kingdom, dominion, seriously, I needed to work on the branding. I knew that this was just the beginning. I had a vision, a plan, dare I say it, a destiny. This wasn't just about winning battles anymore. This was about building a legacy, about leaving my mark on history, about becoming more than just a history professor. Okay, so empire might be pushing it, at least at first. It was more like a confederation of slightly less warring kingdoms, held together by a shared fear of Vargarian axes and a grudging respect for my unnatural knowledge of governance. Apparently, the concept of taxation without excessive pillaging was a bit of a novelty in these parts. Ragnar, I said one day, after witnessing a particularly chaotic attempt at, well, I'm not even sure what they were trying to do, but it involved a lot of shouting, chickens, and a surprisingly flammable cart. We need to talk about infrastructure. Ragnar, who was currently attempting to braid his beard into a series of intricate knots, a surprisingly popular pastime among the Vargarian elite, frowned. What now? Infrastructure, I repeated patiently. It means roads, bridges, sewers, things that make a society function. He blinked. Function. Yes, function, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of civic pride. Like making sure the roads aren't so muddy that your supply wagons get stuck in the spring, or that your waste disposal system doesn't result in, well, everyone getting sick. He looked at me like I'd just revealed the secrets of indoor plumbing, which, to be fair, I kind of had. This infrastructure, it is necessary. Necessary? It's essential, I declared, launching into a passionate lecture on the importance of public works, efficient transportation networks, and the benefits of not having raw sewage flowing through the streets. And so, with a mix of historical knowledge, common sense, and a healthy dose of what could possibly go wrong attitude, I set about transforming the Vargarian Empire, kingdom, still working on the name, into a surprisingly functional society. We built roads, sturdy and straight, that allowed for the swift movement of troops and supplies, and the occasional bewildered merchant who stumbled upon our domain. We constructed bridges, spanning rivers and ravines, that connected previously isolated communities and facilitated trade, and the occasional daring raid on unsuspecting neighbors. And yes, we even implemented a rudimentary sewage system, much to the delight of the Vargarian population, and the dismay of the local river wildlife, who had apparently grown accustomed to the nutrient-rich runoff. But it wasn't just about bricks and mortar. I also introduced them to the wonders of administration. Ragnar, I said one day, after witnessing a particularly chaotic attempt at, well, I'm not even sure what they were trying to do, but it involved a lot of shouting, chickens, and a surprisingly flammable scroll. We need to talk about bureaucracy. Ragnar, who was currently attempting to balance a battle axe on his nose, don't ask, frowned. Bureau. What now? Bureaucracy, I repeated with a sigh. It means organizing things, keeping records, having systems. He blinked. Systems? Yes, systems, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of administrative fervor. Like a system for collecting taxes, a system for resolving disputes, a system for making sure that the right information gets to the right people at the right time. He looked at me like I'd just suggested they start a book club. This bureaucracy, it is boring. Boring, it's essential, I declared, launching into a passionate lecture on the importance of record-keeping, efficient governance, and the benefits of not having every decision made by a shouting match and a coin toss. And so, with a mix of historical knowledge, common sense, and a healthy dose of, please just let me organize something, I set about transforming the Vargarian Empire, kingdom, still working on the name, into a surprisingly well-run society. We established a system of tax collection that was relatively fair and efficient, and involved significantly less pillaging than the previous method. We created a rudimentary legal system with clearly defined laws and a surprisingly impartial judge, a former blacksmith who had a knack for settling disputes with a well-aimed hammer. And yes, we even implemented a system of record keeping, using a combination of clay tablets, trained scribes, and my trusty notebook, which was rapidly filling up with surprisingly detailed notes on Vargarian customs, battle tactics, and favorite mead recipes. The results were remarkable. The Vargarian Empire, kingdom, still working on the name, was becoming a beacon of stability and order in a world of chaos and conflict. People flocked to our domain, seeking refuge from war, famine, and, well, poorly maintained sewage systems. "You have built something extraordinary, Nathan," Ragnar said to me one day as we surveyed the bustling Vargarian capital, its streets filled with merchants, farmers, and surprisingly well-behaved children. "It was a team effort, Ragnar," I said, trying to share the credit. "A team effort?" he scoffed. "You are the architect, Nathan, the builder, He paused, searching for the word. "Civilizer." "Sure, Ragnar," I chuckled. "The civilizer." But as I looked at the faces of the people, their eyes filled with a newfound hope, their lives improved by the stability and order we had brought, I realized that he was right. I had made a difference. I had used my knowledge, my passion, my unnatural understanding of history to build something lasting, something meaningful, something extraordinary. The wind whipped through my hair, longer now and decidedly less kempt than in my professorial days, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Beneath me, my war horse, a magnificent beast named Thor, Ragnar's idea, naturally, shifted impatiently, eager to be on the move. But I held him still, my gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of well, let's just call it an empire, shall we? "It's quite something, isn't it?" I murmured, more to myself than to Thor, who was more interested in sniffing out a particularly enticing patch of clover. "Something?" a gruff voice echoed behind me. "It is everything. You have built an empire, Nathan." I turned to see Ragnar, his armor gleaming in the sunlight, his face weathered by years of battle and, well, probably a lack of sunscreen. He looked older, wiser, and, dare I say it, a little less clueless. Years of working alongside me, witnessing my unnatural strategies and surprisingly effective administrative reforms, had left their mark. "We built it together, Ragnar," I said, offering him a rare smile. "You and me, and, well, a few thousand slightly less clueless warriors." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed across the valley. "We were lost, Nathan, before you came, fighting amongst ourselves, squabbling over scraps of land, living like animals." "We weren't that bad," I protested, though I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. "We were worse," he insisted. "But you showed us a different way, a way to unite, to build, to conquer." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the landscape, his voice filled with a newfound pride. "This is our legacy, Nathan, yours and mine. The legacy of the Vargarian Empire." The Vargarian Empire. It still sounded a bit strange to my ears, but I had to admit it had a certain ring to it. And it was mine. Or at least partly mine. I, Nathan Davies, the unappreciated history professor, the dismissed scholar, the man with no real power. I had become an emperor. A wave of something washed over me. Not pride, not exactly. More like wonder, disbelief, and a strange sense of rightness. Like this was where I was always meant to be. Like this was the story I was always meant to write. I thought of Melissa, her ambition, her social connections, her endless pursuit of, well, whatever it was she was pursuing. I imagined her reaction if she could see me now, sitting atop my war horse, surveying my vast domain, the wind carrying the cheers of my people, the sun glinting off the armor of my loyal warriors. Would she be impressed? Envious? Regretful? I honestly didn't know, and more importantly, I didn't care. That world, the world of cocktail parties and networking events, of quarterly earnings and social status. It seemed so distant now, so small, so insignificant. It was a world where knowledge was confined to dusty textbooks, where history was a collection of dates and names, where power was measured in bank accounts and social connections. But here, in this world of blood and steel, of ancient battles and forgotten empires, knowledge was power. History was a living thing, a guide to the present, a weapon to be wielded. And power was the ability to shape a world, to lead an army, to build a legacy that would last for generations. I looked out at my empire, the fields of golden wheat stretching towards the horizon, the bustling cities humming with activity, the people going about their lives, their faces filled with a newfound hope, a sense of belonging. This was my creation, my legacy, my destiny. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, I knew that there was no going back. The rift that had brought me here, the portal to this improbable adventure, had closed behind me, severing the ties to my old life, to the world that had dismissed me, belittled me, and ultimately set me free. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "Beautiful," Ragnar echoed, his eyes filled with a warrior's pride. "It is ours, the Vargarian Empire, and you are its emperor. Emperor Nathan." It had a nice ring to it. I smiled, a genuine smile, the kind I hadn't felt in a lifetime. This was my world now, my empire, my legacy. And as I turned Thor towards the setting sun, the wind whipping through my hair, the cheers of my people echoing in my ears, I knew that I had found my true place in history. The world I had left behind was too small for me. This world, this empire, this destiny, it was everything I had ever wanted and more. And as I rode towards the horizon, the future stretching before me, filled with challenges and possibilities, I knew that this was just the beginning. The story of Emperor Nathan, the conqueror, the strategist, you get the idea. That story was just beginning to be written. And it was going to be legendary.